Greetings, everyone. Once again, it's Motamonidi sharing the authentic truth brought to us by Zula 100, the only teacher. So before I begin, I would like to thank Loba, the only and unique creator, to have allowed us by the manifestation of his will through his verb to know the truth in his time in this era through Zula 100. So be it. So the teaching I will share here in English, it's a sort of continuation of a teaching that Zul Lassan did give in French, and it was regarding the obscurity. So in this teaching, Zul Lassan tells us to persevere, to continue until the end, exhort us to continue until the end. And to persevere beside the entity of perseverance, because we know behind perseverance there's also an entity of perseverance. So here the teaching is going to be before the creation of the visible, in bracket, the non-existent. During the creation, we know that there were 7 entities of the great order of things at the beginning of creation, the visible creation. Now we shall see how the world was created, before the world was created. So before the creation of the visible. What happened behind the veil, behind what we can see? Because currently, there's many theories out there regarding the creation, regarding how it happened. Depending on your tribe, depending on the nation you live in, depending on what you have read, how you grew up, and so on, the religion you have accepted, what you've learned, the theories, the scientists, there will be many sort of theories. They will have the theories of the Big Bang and so on. But we shall see in Bibèl Karatambale, the book of the truth, the only authentic Bible, how it truly happened. And what happened in Bibèl, it's also revealed in the book of Dubissé, Kalata Dubissé, the prophet Enoch. That's the authentic version. For that, we shall go into the book of Dubissé, chapter 1, verse 451 to 470. Now, his true name is Dubissé. He's known in the current classical of the Bible as Enoch, but that's his true name. His true name is Dubissé. And Dubissé means baptized and also initiated. So it was an initiated, and in a hidden meaning, so he was baptized and initiated. So he went out of the multiverses. He had a vision. He was taken out of his body. He had spiritual experiences. He saw other form of existence, and that he didn't even mention in the book, in these writings. And for that, in verse 451, and I will be translating here in English, while I heard the revealing words of the Mandaté come out. So Dubissé went out of his body, out of time and space before the beginning, because he had a spiritual experience. So it was in another realm. And in that realm, it was out of time and space. So he was out of our current existence in the visible. And it was before the beginning, like I've mentioned, because he was out of time and space. And he heard the revealing words of the Mandaté. Who is the Mandaté? Is the entity that guides and enthrones the initiates. Because there is different type of words. there is revealing words. They can also be sentencing words and so on. And here, Dubise, the prophet, the Mutopeda Mudi, heard the revealing words of the Mutatedi. So he focuses on the revealing words. Those words were revealing. So there's the revelation. I, Dubise, I was seized with amazement and at the same time with wonder. So here you're told he was seized with amazement because Mutatedi, the entity, when Dubise hear the words, is in his presence, he is amazed because Mutatedi is amazing. And at the same time with wonder. So it's two dimensions in the words, amazement and wonder from the Mutatedi. Verse 452. So, I spoke to Mutatedi and said to him, column, mighty Mutatedi, your revealing words have filled me of dread, of trembling, and of trouble. So, Dubise spoke to Mutatedi. He said to him, mighty Mutatedi, because he's a mighty entity. Your revealing words have filled me. So that means Dubise was filled with those revealing words. Filled, and we know that Dubise means baptized. And when you baptize someone in you have to be covered, you have to be filled. So that's what he says here. Your revealing words have filled me of dread, of trembling, and of trouble. So when you're baptized, you are covered, you are filled. We know in some practices they will submerge you. Verse 453. Then Mutatedi touched me, and strengthened me again. Period. So he was fortified again. That means it happened before. It happened before. He was again fortified. Verse 454. So all this is before the title is Creation of the Visible. Verse 454. Then Mutatedi said to me, Dubise, beloved men, do not be afraid. May peace be with you. Courage, courage. So here, when Mutatedi says to Dubise, beloved man, because he is beloved from the great order of things, because he was an initiate, he was a Mutopeda Mudi, he is a prophet, he's a servant of the verb of Loba. Do not be afraid, because the entity are there with him. May peace be with you. And when he says, may peace be with you, it's not like other people will say, yeah, peace be upon you, or no. This is Mandaté, this is the entity. It's a spiritual. When he says, may peace be with you, you have to understand in the revelation that Zolasan gave, the entity of peace. So may the entity of peace, it's also there, assist you. Because behind everything we know, there is a spirit behind. Courage, courage. Verse 455. And as Mandaté spoke to me, I regained my strength, in bracket, energy. And I said, mighty Mandaté, I beg you, reveal to me by unveiling to me in depth how Tété created the immensity of the universe, this great darkness before the stars and all that is found there and the earth. So, and as Mandaté spoke to me, I regained my strength, energy, and I said, so that's to be said, mighty Mandaté, I beg you, reveal to me. So he wants the revelation. He wants to know. Reveal to me by unveiling to me in depth. So he wants to know in depth. He doesn't want to know on the surface. How Tété is Loba, Tété is the only unique creator. How Tété created the immensity of the universe. So he wants to know that in depth. Because he, Dubise, was an initiate. So he knew, he already learned from his ancestors, from the people that were here before him, how, because he was told how the creation happened as well. But he now wants to know in depth, and not what the ancestors may have told him. He wants to know from those, from the Mandaté, because the Mandaté, the entity, was there at the creation. So he wants to know from someone that has assisted, that was there, that participated, that was in action. Reveal to me by unveiling to me in depth how Tété created the immensity of the universe. This great darkness. Before the stars and all that is found there and the earth. When it says here, by unveiling to me in depth. We know, like I've mentioned, Dubise's name is baptized and is an initiated. So, and like when you're baptized, you are immersed. And that's why it says here, in depth. So that's the second phase. First, he was filled, then in depth. Now he is submerged. So Dubise wants to know everything. He doesn't want Mutatedi to hide him anything regarding the creation. He wants, basically, do not hide me anything, tell me everything regarding the creation. Now, verse 456, that's before, the title is Before the Creation of the Visible, still in Dubise. Mutatedi answered me and said, before the beginning of your reality, comma, before the beginning of your reality. And here the reality and the beginning are B, so uppercase B and uppercase R. So that's the reality before the fall. Because the reality before the fall and the reality after the fall, it's not comparable. Before the beginning of your reality, comma, t'étais, comma, by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, comma. So it's by the manifestation of the will of Tete. So by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, manifested by declaring by Eyala, his verb, let Bebotedi, the beginning of the visible reality, be manifested into the existence. And he says in verse 456, in bracket, the entity of the beginning of the visible reality, accompanied by the entity of existence. So I'll read again the verse 456. Mutatedi answered me and said, before the beginning of your reality, Tete, by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, manifested by declaring by Eyala, his verb, let Bebotedi, the beginning of the visible reality, be manifested into the existence. The entity of the beginning of the visible reality, accompanied by the entity of existence. So because in the teaching that Zulasan gave regarding the obscurity, he mentioned that obscurity represents a support on which then was manifested. We see, because when you look at the universe, you see obscurity. So that obscurity represents a support. But obscurity also has a support. And the support is the reality. There are things that exist that we may not know, but it's nevertheless a reality. So before the ocean, the obscurity, Loba declared by his verb that the reality be So let Bibèl dit, the beginning of the visible reality, be manifested into the existence. So the reality represents a support for the obscurity. And the reality itself is a support, but is also manifested into the existence. So the existence is also the support for the reality. So the existence was first manifested. That reality was manifested into the existence, into the existence. So the existence is manifested, and then the reality is manifested into that existence. That reality is manifested into that existence. And the obscurity then manifested into that reality. So the obscurity manifested into that reality. So he says the entity of the beginning of the visible reality. So why did that entity manifest? Because they are like workers, like masons at work. So the entity of the beginning of the visible reality accompanied by the entity of existence. So those two entities were also there before the beginning of the creation, before the creation of the visible. Verse 457. It was after the manifestation of the entity of the beginning of the visible reality and that of the entity of existence before the creation of the visible, that the entity of wisdom, the entity of discernment, the entity of science, the entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force, and the entity of justice manifested themselves before the known beginning for the known work. And we see the reference Job chapter 8, verse 23 and verse 27. So Dubuisset was revealed that even before the seven entities of the beginning of the creation, there were two other entities, the entity of existence and the entity of the beginning, the entity of the beginning of the visible reality. So it is like, for example, like before you take a shower, you first have to remove your clothes. Remove your clothes. Before putting the soap, you have to pour water. So though they are steps before, they are steps. And those steps in the creations will represent the entity. The entity, they are the laws. They are the codes. So, like in the example that I'm sharing that Zulasan gave regarding the shower, you remove your clothes, that's already an action. And in that action, behind there are entities. So regarding there are codes. So there's the one entity that will represent the water that will manifest. Then there is the entity that will represent the soul that will manifest, the one who represent to scrub that will manifest. So those are the codes. So it's the same thing regarding the creation. There are laws that are set, that are put in place. And those laws, those codes are the entities. Creation happens like that. So it was after the manifestation of the entity of the beginning of the visible reality and that of the entity of existence, before the creation of the visible, that the entity of wisdom, then we see the entity of wisdom. Because to create, in the creation, can we qualify Loba of being wise, that he is wise? No. Loba is beyond. He manifests the wisdom. So because in the creation there is wisdom. Even when you look at the universe, the visible creation, there are laws. It's well put in place. So there needs to be wisdom in there as the foundation of the visible, of the reality. So the entity prepared the place. It's with precision. It is like, for example, when you buy a land, an area, a place, a domain. It is not right away that the masons are going to go first to start building the house. No. You have to first locate the area, the location where you're gonna buy that and that you're gonna build on. And so there is the surveyor that is gonna go survey the area, the land, locate, place the limits. Mark off the limits before the masons come in and build. So it is the same thing for the earth, for the visible, for the universe, and for the earth, because the earth could have been placed in another place, but it is a specific location, because if it was put at another place, our oxygen wouldn't be the same. The gravity and the laws, it would be different. That's why even before the fall, Moto was flying. But after the fall, that law, so for the men, it's now changed. It was affected. So the two entity manifest, do what they have to do, then the other entity manifest. So first the entity of existence, then the entity of the beginning of the visible reality, then the other 7 entities manifest. Now, those entities were also there at works, the 7 entities. That's what he says here. The entity of wisdom, like I've mentioned, because the creation is wise, there's wisdom behind. The entity of discernment, because you have to discern, for example, the location, the place. There's discernment, intelligence behind. The entity of science, because science, it's the knowledge to create, put in place the visible. So that's why you see the manifestation of the entity of knowledge there, because that will represent a foundation for the visible creation as well. The entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force. So there's intelligence, there's reflection, there is force. Because when you see the earth in the immensity of the universe, what put it in place, set it in place? The earth is heavy, is beyond what we can calculate. But it doesn't fall, it's suspended. That means there's force behind. So those entities were there as laws, as codes. Now, that does not mean that there are many creators. Loba is the only creator. The entities are laws, established laws. And the entity of justice manifested themselves before the known beginning of the known work. And what is the known work? The known work is the earth, the stars, the universe, what we see. It was prepared for the king, for Kinye, for Moto, the first man. So it is like, for example, before two parents, they receive their child, they give birth to the child, they are going to prepare the place, they're going to prepare the area, they're going to prepare the house to receive their children, to accommodate their children. So it is the same thing for the visible reality. It was prepared, set in place for Moto to come. So you see, people sometimes they do things in the visible and they are reproducing, meaning copying, manifesting what was already done, but they don't even know. And those were not the only entities that were there. It is not because the other entities are not named that they were not present. Other entities were also there. They saw, the witness. But if we name every entities, the book is going to be, you see. So that's why here it says in verse 458 before. These entities were the 7th mighty entities of the great order of things, who did put themselves during who did put themselves during visible creation to path above the primitive water from beyond the great veil. This after the manifestation of the entity of the beginning of the visible reality and that of the entity of existence before the creation of the visible. Verse 459, Mandaté dit, said to me again, here is now how the beginning of the reality of the visible occurred. So Dubicé was told, he was being told how it happened. And when Mandaté tells him, Dubicé sees also, because Mandaté showed him also with the images. When Dubicé is told, he sees what happened. And at that moment, who is he? When he sees, when he's hearing, and when he's seeing the creation in the vision. It is little, but because the entities are there, the verb of loba is nevertheless important. Verse 460. At the beginning of your reality, the entity of beginning of the beginning of the visible reality and the entity of existence were in motion at their post according to the law established by Eyala Tete. So established by the verb of Tete. So you are told here that the entity were placed in their post, but that was before the visible reality. Because here it says, at the beginning of your reality, the entity of beginning of the visible reality and the entity of existence were in motion at their post. But where were they? If the visible was not yet manifested, if the obscurity was not yet manifested, if it wasn't yet created, what was that place? What was that place? Because the physical reality wasn't there. Imagine the universe, and the stars are like eyes. In the scriptures, you're told regarding the Mabau, the ophanims. Imagine that the universe and the stars are like the eyes of the Mabau, the ophanim. So, you see, it's another form of existence. But here we are not going to go in depth regarding the ophanims. But here it says, they were at their post according to the law established by Eyala Tete. So, no force or will can go beyond the will, the manifestation of the will of Tete. The manifestation of the will of Loba, of the verb. Who is the verb? Who is the manifestation of his will? In the Cranklascade Bible, you're told that no, the word has taken a body. Is if the word takes a body, if the verb takes a body, becomes physical, then how are the laws of the universe stable in the great order of things? What about in the great order of things? So it is not like the current classical day Bible claim. So in verse 461, it says, T'était, by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, he declared, and by Eyala, his verb, the entity of wisdom, the entity of discernment, the entity of science, the entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force, and the entity of justice made their appearance and did put themselves in motion to their post according to the law established by Eyala Tite. So each reality has an appropriate law. Form of justice. For example, if in our reality it is for us to have 2 eyes, but in other realities, for example, for the cherubim, they have many eyes. You're not going to say, no, I want to have many eyes as well. No, for our reality, it is 2. That's justice. So, verse 461, T'était, by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, he declared, and by Eyala, his verb, the entity of wisdom, the entity of discernment, the entity of science, the entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force, and the entity of justice made their appearance and did put themselves in motion to their post according to the law established by Eyala Tite. Verse 462. Tete, by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, created in the Bebotedi, beginning of the visible reality, physical, Madiba Ibaidi, primitive water. Mundima Madiba Ibaidi, the entity of primitive water, made his appearance and moved to his post according to the law established by Eyala Tite. Here in verse 400, this text is simply very powerful, too powerful. You're told in verse 462, Tete is Loba, the only and unique creator. By the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will. Because in the current classical day Bible, they will say, God in the beginning created. No. They don't understand. They cannot go beyond. The Bible, the current Bible scholars, they are limited. They are unaware. It's by the manifestation of Bepuledi Puli, his will, created in the Bebotedi, beginning of the visible reality, physical, Madiba Ibaidi, primitive water. So the primitive water, so that's the water of the beginning. Because when you even the universe, it's water on in a different form, in a different state. Created in the beginning of the visible reality, physical, Madiba Ibaidi, primitive water, semicolon, Mundima Madiba Ibaidi, the entity of primitive waters, made his appearance and moved to his post according to the law established by Mandaté. Verse 463. But Mundima Madiba Baidi, so the entity of primitive water, was not in the company of the entity of wisdom, was not in the company of the entity of wisdom, the entity of discernment, the entity of science, the entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force, and the entity of justice. So that's why Dubise saw, but he did not only see regarding the 7 entities. He saw that there were even other entities that were also there, that were also set in place, that were also in motions, that were also at work. Dubise saw it when the multiverses so that's plural, multiverses are set, the entities are set. In everything that exists, there's a spirit behind. For example, regarding our body, the cells. Behind every body part, every part of our physical being, there is cells at work. And the cells will represent the entities, the particles. So the particles in our body will represent the entities. So you are shown how the creation is in order. Verse 464. Tété, by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, gave to this primitive water the form of myriads of innumerable forms of Gondé circle, which became multiverses, the guardian entities of the cosmic consciousness made their appearance and did put themselves in motion at their post according to the law established by Mandaté. So once again, verse 464. Tété, by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, gave to this primitive water the form of myriads of innumerable forms of Gondé circle, which became multiverses, the guardian entities of the cosmic consciousness made their appearances and did put themselves in motion at their posts according to the law established by Mandaté. And we see that also in Job chapter 38 verse 7. So the multiverses are governed by rules, by law. In their theories, the scientists, so-called scientists, will say no, the universe came, the stars and so on, it is because of the Big Bang. But they themselves will claim that there's nothing without a cause. There's the notion of cause and effect. There's no effect without cause. But they will claim that the Big Bang happened, but what is the cause of the Big Bang? Because if the Big Bang, that's the effect, what is the cause? Then they will come up with the theories, in different type of theories to try to explain. And then they will come up with the theory of the wick, that it was lightened up. But for something to be lightened up, and we see the effect, we see that the effect is in order. Behind, we know there's laws. So that means there's equations There is intelligence. There's order in the universe. But they don't want to admit that there is a creator. That's why they become crazy in their own argumentation, in their own theories. Because for them, the creator has to be somewhere to create. But that somewhere is already a limit. So if you're somewhere and you create, that means you're subject to time and space. You're dependent. So what is the origin of that time and space? That's how they cannot go behind it. They cannot get past it. They cannot understand it. That's why they become fools, they become crazy, simply because they don't want to admit that there's a creator, and they don't understand that there is beyond time and space. And he who creates is not contained. He who creates is beyond time and space, beyond everything we can conceive. Verse 465. Then, t'étais, by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, separated them by distancing them from each other by expenses. So he separated them by distancing them from each other by expenses. So everything is full. It's not empty. Because some will use the term nil, that there is the notion of the nil, the nothing, but it's not nothing if you can already name it. So it's already something. It's full. It's not empty. Because when you say empty, well, for example, when you say a room is empty, well, there's air. There's things in there that you may not know, understand, comprehend. Verse 465, then t'étais by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, separated them by distancing them from each other by expenses. So those was regarding because in verse 465 you're told, t'étais by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, gave to this primitive water the form of myriads and myriads of innumerable forms of Condé circle, which became the multiverses. The guardian entities of the cosmic consciousness made their appearance and did put themselves in motion at their posts according to the law established by Eala Tété. Then Tété, by the manifestation of Bibèl, his will, separated them by distancing them from each other by expenses. Verse 466. And he also created the terrestrial globe, also having the shape of Gondé Tengileti, round circle. And we see that in Origin 1:1. Verse 467. The planet Earth was a mass of primordial fluid water without physical life, and was suspended in the immensity of the visible universe. So he says here, the planet Earth was a mass of primordial fluid water without physical life. Specify without physical life, because the entities were there, and the entities are spiritual. You see, Bibèl, Kalata Dubise, it's the precision. Was suspended in the immensity of the visible universe. And what does he say here? And was suspended. You can say, well, it is still suspended in the immensity of the universe. For the entities, this reality, it's already the past. It's already over. It's already done. Because they are beyond time and space, beyond our time and space. So from the beginning of creation, even before the beginning of creation, until the end, all that, for the great order of things, if we want to understand according to our understanding, all that, it's already the past. It's, how to say, it's not even a fraction of a second. So before it happened, it was already the past. So before the beginning of the visible began, it was already the past. You see? It's tremendous. Verse 468. The mysterious darkness covered the very deep chasm, and the manifestation of the will of Tété through his verb was still exercising his generative talent above the primitive water, beyond the great veil, in bracket, out of the universe. The mysterious darkness covered the very deep chasm of, and the manifestation of the will of Tété through his verb was still exercising its generative talent above the primitive water, beyond the great veil, out of the universe. That for the so-called scientists that will try to calculate or estimate, give theories that no, we estimate that the universe came, they will say 280 million years, 200 billion years, and so on. Give estimations and so on. How are they cannot calculate. How are they estimating when the universe, how it began? They cannot. Because the terrestrial time or visible time wasn't there. For them, before the Nile, there was nothing. For them, in obscurity, there was no terrestrial time, no carbon 14. So they can't estimate, they cannot guess. Because the earth came before terrestrial time. The earth was manifested before the sun, before the moon. So how are they then going to say we estimate that the earth has been here for millions, and they'll give estimations? How are they coming up with those numbers when the terrestrial time wasn't there yet when the earth was created? Because even in the current classical day Bible, you're told regarding at the end of time, regarding the judgment, that there will be no sun, there will be no moon. But you're told nevertheless that there will be the new Jerusalem. So the trace of the earth will still be there. Verse 469. Thus the entity of wisdom, the entity of discernment, the entity of science, the entity of reflection, the entity of intelligence, the entity of force, and the entity of justice did put themselves at pat over the primitive water beyond the great veil. There were noises and ineffable voices, which is not permitted for a man to express. So, what were those voices? We understand we know it's sawa, the high frequency. But what were those voices saying? You want an answer? Well, to give you a preview, Zola-san asked a question. When you are on the beach and there's waves, what does those waves say? Because it is a language. What are they saying? What is the ocean saying? What is the wave saying? If we answer that question, we must first answer that question because it is mysterious. Verse 470. The noises are ineffable voices which emanated from this primitive water from beyond the great veil. Came from the Mundi Madibai, the entity of primitive waters, and from the 7 entities who did put themselves during the creation of the visible to pat above the primitive water from beyond the great veil. So that was before the creation of the visible, in bracket, the non-existence. It was a teaching. I'm sharing the teaching here in English translation of a teaching given by Zulu-san, the only teacher. Kalata Dubise. Leave the link in the description. Is from Les Éditions Zulula 100. Bibèl, the authentic Bible, the only authentic Bible in the world without any contradictions or errors. So that's the source, the knowledge, true spirituality. Because knowledge, science, it's knowledge. And Zulu-san is sharing, telling us, revealing to us that hidden knowledge, hidden science. All glory to Loba, the only and unique creator.